Hi there, I'm John of John's Carnivorous Plants. This is my indoor nursery, and today we are going to be talking about, should you take plants from the wild? TLDR, no, don't. Just don't. There's no good reason, honestly. To go line by line here with the nice little outline that was written up for me here. Should you take them from the wild? Environmental impact of wild collection. Well, you're going to destroy biodiversity. Biodiversity is something that most people can't wrap their heads around. If you took a plant out of the wild, it is no longer a part genetically of the biodiversity of the biome. And you have now permanently removed that specimen and its genetic lineage from the population. It doesn't sound like much, but whenever it's like one or two plants, maybe the species will get by. You know, who knows? Recessive traits that are important for survival can, bounce around a population quite well. But when you start taking entire sites, or say, for example, a plant is in only one site and you take, like, if there's like 50 specimens there and you end up taking 25 or more of them, you've now just damaged the genetic population to a point that it might not be as resilient as it used to be. And that's very important to recognize, is that, yeah, the plants might be okay right now in the current conditions now, but we are living in a very ever-changing world where climate change and just changing weather patterns in general are a very big thing. It's happening, whether or not people want to argue it. And the data is there to support that, yes, climate is not something that stays stable, for all of time. And basically, you get just really stable conditions across an area. No, there's always some element of change. And when that change does occur, it's imperative for not even just plants, but like all life, any species, to have a large population that has numerous different recessive traits that whenever, adversity hits, some of them are more drought tolerant, some of them are more tolerant to wetter conditions. Who knows which one is going to be the more advantageous thing in the future? But the fact is, evolution accounts for that by making both sets go forward. And just because one is drought tolerant does not mean it does not have the traits or the genetic information from the ones that love the more wet environments, the more waterlogged, swampy environments. So just because something, errs towards one side doesn't mean that it's completely lost everything from the other side of its, lineage. Keeping that in mind, we want plants to have as much access to those, well, not just plants, but like life and species, to have as much access as they can to these genetic reservoirs that they've built up over time that then can be reintroduced to the population. And now you're like, oh, well, what? If I just take a sundew, how is that going to prevent them from being drought tolerant? If you took the most drought tolerant sundew of a population away, and then a drought hits the next year, that the genetic information of that plant is no longer being circulated around. It means the plants that come in the successive generations are not going to have the extreme level of drought tolerance that one specimen had, to then be able to further mutate and go further than that and become even more drought tolerant. Instead, now the whole species has to do the work to get back to where it already was in that location. That's millions of years set back just because one person wants a plant that they're going to grow for maybe 1 to 2 years at most, which, just very solid facts. Carnivorous plant hobby here. Less than 10% of my stock will survive longer than a year in someone's collection. Take that as you will, of whenever somebody's trying to take a plant from the wild, why I'm always like, no, that makes no sense. Unless you're someone like me who can verifiably prove that they've been growing these plants in a very large, in a somewhat commercial setting, to where like you're producing enough to be sold, then you're not going to be able to help the problem. You're not going to be able to solve what you've done. And in the case of like a lot of these plants throughout my collection, I know for a fact, like some of them, like the Brocinias and a few of the other plants, they come from an era back before like a lot of the poaching laws existed. So by modern standards, we would consider these plants poached. But the fact is, they've been in cultivation for so long, if people would just let them die, that's almost as bad as the poachers themselves, because you took something from the wild, and then now the genetics are never going to be able to be seen again. And then you took it out for horticultural purposes. It's not even going to go to horticulture if you can't propagate it, and it dies. So I look at these people who are out there poaching, like, Nepenthes and stuff like that. The poachers themselves aren't the problem. And I'll be completely honest with that, in that most of the time, and I'll say this very loudly, people over in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands that are poaching Nepenthes, these are incredibly poor people that, yeah, they might sell a Nepenthes for $20, $30 that over here might be like a $200 to $2,000 plant. But to them, that was dinner for an entire month for them and their family. Like, there's some very big issues there that, like, if you're going to say them poaching is the problem, I beg to say no. The fact is that poaching was such a good option for them to be able to feed themselves. That's kind of the problem to me. In that, yeah, nobody should have to go destroy the biodiversity around them just to survive. Now, when it comes to over here in the United States, none of the carnivorous plants that grow here in the US cannot be easily found in cultivation. Well, hold on, I need to reword that. All of the plants here in North America that are carnivorous are easily found already in cultivation. There is no logical reason for you to go out and become a little location hunter because you want to have every Drosera intermedia that ever existed. Blow one out yourself, okay? Literally pack that all up in a big backpack, put it on yourself, and get out of here. And you know why? You're part of a big problem here, because that's actually what's going to destroy a lot of these species. Get the $5, $10 plant that, oh, it may have been from a lineage from Cuba, not the one that's from your backyard. But it's already in cultivation, already being sold. You don't have to go dig it up, which may or may not be poaching, but it's still wild collection, which to me is woefully unethical if there already exists an alternative in cultivation that you can get. Now, that's funny. It's actually the sustainable alternative that I was about to get to on this list. There's obviously legal considerations if you're wild collecting plants, which, going back over all of this, there's just a whole quagmire of issues that you probably aren't aware of whenever it comes to whether or not you can legally collect a plant. Like, whether or not it's legal for you to do it at a federal level, whether or not it's legal for you to do it at a state level, or whether or not it's legal for you to do it at a local level. That's just here in the United States. And then whenever you apply international poaching laws and all these other, treaties and whatnot on top of it, it gets even murkier. Because some places around the world, you can legally just go dig up a plant, but it becomes poaching as soon as you try to go send it over international lines. And it's a very complicated situation that honestly needs a whole YouTube channel dedicated with hundreds of videos on the topic itself. And I'm just not even going to bullshit you guys. Like, I'm not the one to be able to give you all of the information on poaching. It's a very, very complex gray area subject. Yeah, it's just not, I can't even accurately talk about it entirely. But what I can tell you, though, is if you are concerned about wild collection and you want to know if you've crossed that line into poaching, like, yeah, my moral stance of, like, if it's in cultivation, you shouldn't be grabbing it. That's a moral stance. That's not a legal one. But on the other hand of it, if you have some bladderworts or pitcher plants growing in your yard or a neighbor's yard or, your grandparents or something like that, okay, like, it's a population that's on private property that you know of, and it's not an endangered plant on the federal list, the endangered species list. It's not state threatened or state endangered, which those can also get you in trouble as well. And is not locally threatened or endangered. You will go through those, we'll jump through those hoops, which the best way to do that is to contact your local Fish and Wildlife office and ask them what species you can or cannot take off of private property. They're very well versed in your area of what you can and cannot take. So they're definitely the ones to ask, not me, because I'm not the one enforcing the poaching laws. They are. So keeping that in mind, always go to the feds and ask them first, because even whenever it comes to the state and local, they're a lot more knowledgeable than just Joe Schmo on the internet. You know, as much as I like to pontificate about certain subjects here and there, I'm not a wellspring of knowledge that is just all legally correct. So definitely look into, if you have an interest in like a particular kind of bladderwort, which like for me, I'll give you a little story here. I have been trying to contact people in Florida to wild collect for me some seeds or a small stolone of Utricularia similans. It is not threatened. It is not endangered. It is incredibly common throughout the Fort Lauderdale area of Florida. Like, actually, it's mostly Florida. Most of Florida, it's common. But the Fort Lauderdale one is particularly the one I want because it has a good gradient from orange to yellow in its flower. It's very pretty, very noticeable, and it makes the species stand out. Whereas other locations, yeah, there's ones that are very orange, there's ones that are very yellow. And the very sad thing is, all of these variations, none of them are in cultivation. Literally, I've been trying to track down Utricularia similans. There's a few people in Florida who've wild collected it, but have never actually distributed it. This is one of the rare situations that I want to talk about, like on the opposite flip side of my, no, you should never wild collect. This is one of those legitimate cases of me as a nursery owner looking to try and wild collect something or find somebody who can go through the legal process. I've already, crossed my T's, dotted my I's, called Fish and Wildlife, called my local people, called down to Florida. I've made sure it's okay for me and legal for me to obtain this plant this way and be able to propagate it and give it out to people so nobody else has to go through the hoops that I'm trying to jump through. And that's basically the biggest point of, if you have a long-term desire to see these plants thrive and you're one of those people who's like, oh man, I want to wild collect, you should really look into becoming a nursery first. No joke, like become a nursery. If it's a particular plant species that isn't in cultivation right now, like contact someone like me, California Carnivorous, stuff like that. If you have one that's native to you, it's not threatened or anything. I mean, most of us would be happy to have an extra new plant that, isn't in cultivation at the moment. And I know surely there's other collectors out there who would too. It's all a matter of just trying to stay ahead of the poaching game, because as soon as something becomes valuable, if it's not already in cultivation and it takes a long time for it to cultivate, then it's a prime target for large-scale poaching operations. Or like I was saying in the previous situation of like somebody over in Indonesia, they see how much Americans want to pay for it and they're willing to sell it at 1/10 of the price just because it's literally worth a month of their food. So yeah, there's a lot of pressure in the situation, and ultimately it just comes down to, in order to prevent more demand for wild collected plants, I err towards the side of no, nobody should be wild collecting, especially if it's something that's already in cultivation. Very few people are an exception to that rule, in the fact that if you have a nursery, you are capable and have demonstrated that you are growing various other species like it and can propagate it, or at least have a very good shot at propagating it in some of the cases of plants that haven't been, then yeah, we can't demonize people like that for trying trying to remove the pressure, so to speak, of, oh, someone has to go dig it up out of the wild now. Well, no, there's already been one that's been germinated out of the wild and someone's propagated it. Now nobody else has to go get it. And then we got to go into the part of economics and whatnot, which that's where the pooch kind of gets screwed, because that's actually a good video idea for another day, like on how economics can really mess up the conservation of a plant species. But yes, that's definitely a video for another time. This one's kind of getting long. I'm realizing I'm at 15 minutes of ranting. I hope you found this enjoyable or informative and insightful. Please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Join the Discord. Come talk with me. I'm usually doing plant talks every Saturday at 9:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I also have my website where you can come buy plants from me directly and support the channel. Every order helps. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you on the next one.